In this video, we're continuing the multi-part series of the concept of a distributed computing to create free, fair, and open voting. Identity is performative, not possessive. That's the concept. And we kind of got into that a little bit in the first video as an overview. And this is somewhat of a thorny topic. And the reason that this is thorny is that one of the major issues that faces us right now in society is the concept of identity theft, right? Where because the authority, the government, issues to you who you are as far as they're concerned,
Yes.
that can be stolen, that can be replicated, that can be copied, and there could be people out there using your identity without you even knowing about it. And that's, a lot of the dark web spends time doing that. And what we're trying to do in this whole process is perhaps touch on what could identity look like past today down the road, right?
Well, I don't really see much of a future for identity as a concept because it's something that ultimately, even just outside of just that instance of identity theft, it seems to have a bigger problem outside of it politically.
So,
and the thing is, one of the reasons why I say that is if you have this total relation to authority, then there's no way that anything can validate you outside of that.
see, here's the problem. We have to consider when we're developing solutions of what today is and how do you go from today to tomorrow, right? And what you're saying is valid. The concept is valid. The challenge is, how do you define a mechanism so that you as an individual, as a human being,
Yes.
can be tied to something that from a anonymous perspective, I don't know who you are, I want to conduct some kind of transaction with you, can identify you, right? I can say this is really Eric Alage versus somebody else pretending to be Eric Alage. And that's the key. If that can be solved, then identity in the philosophical way, where it's given to you, becomes something that you're born with.
Well, the problem is that concept alone, it still reverts back to this authority. And so it's not like there needs to be a transition, obviously, but the problems we face right now ultimately revolve around that concept of identity. Even if you don't want to change anything in terms of how the system works, a lot of things still revolve around that. And so this dynamic between the individual and authority keeps coming up in everything.
Well, it's based on the fact that it comes from really ancient times and medieval times where the chosen few owned the masses, right? I own you.
Well, yeah, serfdom.
Yeah. I own you. That's
Yes.
hence I can identify you, and here's your branding, right? So the whole concept of identity is coming from the fact that I've given it to you, I've branded you, right? And you still need, from a transactional aspect, some way of transitioning to that because of economy, right? So the idea is, how do you create a system or create a way that is not authoritatively based,
Yeah.
that again you're born with? Some of the ideas I had is, one of the unique things about a human being is what? DNA.
Well, the thing is, there's problems with that. So
Okay.
there's still the system that measures that. So whatever metric you use to screen somebody's DNA, and then the fact that somebody can steal your DNA sequence, and very easily, in fact. And a lot of these different hackers have taken other ways of stealing, ways of validating who you are, like if you're in a crowd of people, taking photos of your hands, and so they can get your entire handprint and fingerprints.
So basically what you're saying is, we have to decouple identity from processes and figure out a different way of essentially saying what, where, when, and who.
I mean, you can do a lot of things that essentially don't need identity. fundamentally having it where things are facilitated outside of an institutional model kind of lends itself to the fact that people don't necessarily need to know who you are in order to actually work with you. And so the fact that two peers are talking to each other is all that's necessary in that process. Versus right now, in order to actually do anything with anyone, I need to know all of these different things about you in order to do anything. Because you could claim to be anything right now. And it does actually matter.
It does. So how do you go from this conversation to bringing it back, because this could be many series on its own, right?
Yeah.
In the context of what we're talking about, which is voting.
Yes.
How are we going to transition somebody who goes in and gets a voter registration card?
Yes.
Using that voter registration card identifies themselves to a voting booth.
Yes.
Right? Then places their vote and gets their vote cast.
Yes.
Now, what happens after that? Let's not get into that. But how do we do that?
Well, so this system, whatever you'd like to call it, I guess it would be just an application. It's essentially going through the motions of formalizing the process between an institution and the individual. And so having a popular system and then having an institutional system basically formalizes this process with each other, so that peer talking to another peer kind of system is essentially the way everything works. So there's no necessity for the concept of identity. This auditable system of seeing how everything works and how all interactions happen essentially acts in place of identity. You're seeing all of these different things that is proving that you exist and that you are real. And it's kind of a human test. It's like you can see the fact that this is human versus not.
Okay. Sounds reasonable. How to implement that into technology might be a little bit challenging.
Well, hence the transition. But ultimately, some of the things that I see as being beneficial just initially, even without any full transition, is the fact that people can see this work in real time parallel to what currently exists. So this almost acts, if nobody even likes this, so just saying, there's an audit of everything. There's no instance where it's standalone. Everything has a footprint to it that isn't violating your privacy. And so because of that, because there's this auditable truth to everything, there's no reason that somebody could just steal your identity and then just do something.
So what you're saying is that I come in, I get my voter registration card, I transition to, for the lack of a better word, an address.
Yes.
Right? And that address is somehow broken up into two key pairs.
Yes.
Between the public network and the private network. And those two key pairs have to line up for a vote to count.
Yes, and so the way that would work is essentially with those two key pairs, and then obviously based off of the appraisal, whatever the institution says, okay, this is the rules of what constitutes a legitimate voter and all of this process associated with that, and they can maintain a ledger that everybody can audit and see. So there's no question on anybody's mind of, okay, whether or not these votes count or don't count.
Yeah, and what you're saying is basically that the nuts and bolts of it, the guts of how this actually would work,
yes,
has to still be determined. But much like encryption algorithms or any kind of security layer, you can talk about the high-level concepts of a key pair and all those things, but the guts of it, how it actually works, is really the secret sauce, right? So how you identify, how you do all those things, with the consideration of two things, I think, in it. One is it will be hacked and it will try to be compromised. And if you can account for the fact that it will happen,
Yes.
then it puts you in a different position because you can build defenses, you can do all those things, but there's always a smarter person out there. Right?
Well, yeah, I mean, this is a situation where the fact that this is a twin network kind of makes it where, you may have the keys, but you don't have the kingdom, so to speak. You have it where the fact that there is this system that is in place, that is established, and there is a lock and there is security means that even if you have this robustness, like let's say you have a quantum computer and you're able to crack any key, there's still this separation. There's this almost an air gap, but it's virtual. And so these networks essentially can't correspond otherwise.
Yeah, no, reasonable. And we separated this topic on its own because on its own, it's a thorny subject, and we wanted to give everybody a isolated place to comment on this because we would love to hear everybody else's views on this because this is not by any means an easy topic, right? The concept of identity and how do you transition away. Identity is given to you, right? It's not something you control. Somebody says this is who you are, and a lot of the stuff that is just contentious is the fact that who you are, your ethnicity, all of that stuff, right? It has to be within a box that it's just trying to box people in. And the idea is if we can develop a way in the interim for this voting process, but then come up with a way that can transition it, I think that would be a cool little thing to do. But thank you all for joining. Anything else you want to add to this one segment here, Eric?
I don't think so.
Thanks all for joining. This was a much deeper subject, but we wanted to kind of cover it before we get into the other parts. Thank you all.